Welcome to Pat's Cast. I'm Brad Whitaker. Calvin Ridley will not become a member of the New England Patriots. Patriots lose out on the bidding to the Tennessee Titans, who it turns out there was a dark horse team lurking in the background that was able to offer him a lot more. And once you factor in the state income tax between Tennessee and Massachusetts, where it's very high, Tennessee has none, and the warm weather climate, he's coming from Jacksonville, and the fact that they offered $1 million more than the Patriots, at least according here to Albert Breer, it was a no-brainer for Ridley to go to the Titans. He didn't seem to really ever want to go to New England. And honestly, I'm not that upset about it, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. But according to Albert Breer here, the Jacksonville Jaguars will be paying Calvin Ridley $23 million a year. And I guess the Patriots were very close. They were willing to offer as much as $22 million, and the Jaguars didn't even quite approach $20 million. But Ridley is getting a 4-year, $92 million deal with $50 million guaranteed. And I was talking about this last night on the podcast saying, look, not a lot of teams are going to want to chase after Calvin Ridley because this is a heavy wide receiver draft. You're going to get a lot of really great talent, and it's not worth throwing a boatload of cash at a guy like Ridley, who at best is probably the 30th best ranked wide receiver in the league. Really not a number one guy unless he plays for a team like the Patriots, who has a very weak receiving core. And Patriots, it looks like they took a stab at him. I think $22 million a year is too much, honestly. I wouldn't have gone above 20. I thought, hey, maybe there's a chance they could get him somewhere closer to 15 a season because, well, then, you have all these teams that want to double dip in the draft and get as many good receivers there as they can, considering it's a receiver-heavy draft. And it looks like most of the league opted to go that route, but Tennessee came in at the last minute, it looks like, and scooped him away, outbidding the Patriots by $1 million. And I'm not that upset about it. I'm really not, because Calvin Ridley is not a premier number one wide receiver. He's not small, but he's not large. He's 6'1". Had a career season last year. Looks to be improving, but still 29 years old, approaching 30. And I think there's other receivers that are a better fit for that number one role who could be slotted in there right away on day one in this draft. And look, I'll get to that in a minute. If you've been watching this podcast, I think you know the guy I'm talking about, but there are other options there in the draft that I think if they selected X player, they would become the number one guy on day one. And I'm not just talking about MHJ, but we'll see what the Patriots do now. It looks like they're probably going to at least consider the trade market a little bit. Keenan Allen is one of the rumored players to be on the trade block. Chargers are at some point, maybe not this offseason, but in the near future, going to have to shed some cap space, and getting rid of Allen's contract would be a way to do it, and the Patriots could afford to bring on a heavy contract like that. Same with T. Higgins. He was franchise tagged. You probably have to sign him to an extension, but I'd be willing to fork over $20+ million for T. Higgins. I'm not sure I'd be willing to fork over $20+ million for a guy like Calvin Ridley. Another guy who's kind of undersized, similar to Ridley, Brandon Ayuk, who I like a lot more than Ridley, even though he isn't that large-bodied number one wide receiver. He's potentially available for the Patriots to get via trade. So they have some options here. May cost them a second or third round pick and then a lengthy, expensive contract extension. But look, the Patriots could have afforded to pay Ridley $24 million a year, $25 if they really wanted to. But I think that's too much for a receiver of his caliber. If you're spending that much money, you might as well pay $26 for a Mike Evans, a guy that is guaranteed. I know Ridley had 1,000 yards last season, but Evans had 1,000 yards every season of his career. You want a guy who's going to be a good fit on day one, and you know you're going to get production out of. Maybe Justin Jefferson's available now that the Vikings look to be in full rebuild mode. It's possible if they're not excited about the number 3 pick, they can get some more draft capital and a guy like Justin Jefferson and sign him to a contract extension, although he's going to demand a lot of money. There's a lot of options for the Patriots here on the trade market, but I would strongly advise, as I've said time and time again, highly consider drafting Marvin Harrison Jr., with the 3rd overall pick in the draft, particularly if the Patriots are not high on Drake May, which it sounds like scouts in the organization are not. They're not high on J.J. McCarthy, or they don't think he's worth the 3rd overall pick. And if they think a little more highly of one of the second-tier quarterbacks, like Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr. or Spencer Rattler, guys who they could potentially get early in the 2nd round with a 34th overall pick. I like Nix, even though he's up there in age, but he's not that old, right? Like, he's experienced, has all the tools. I think NFL Draft Buzz says he's like the 3rd or 4th best quarterback in this draft. I would consider drafting him. If Michael Penix Jr.'s health doesn't seem to be as much of a concern as people say, maybe he's the guy you go for. Or you go after a Rattler in the 3rd or 4th round and say, look, we got a raw talent here. Maybe he has to sit a year or 2 on the bench, but we're going to surround Jacoby Brissett in the next future quarterback with as much talent as we can. And that starts with drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. 1st overall, a once-in-a-generation wide receiver, yada, yada, yada. But he really is the type of guy who's going to be a top 10 NFL wide receiver on day one. Calvin Ridley, top 30 wide receiver, right? That's going to cost you $23 million a year. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be a rookie contract for cheap that you lock up for 4 years on end. And if you don't think you're getting the quarterback of the future at 3rd overall, or at least you think you're taking a massive risk, which you are, you never know. It's a crapshoot picking a quarterback early. Take the guarantee. Take the guy that you know is going to hit on week 1, and that is Marvin Harrison Jr. Or, I mean, you could consider trading back and double dipping in the 1st round, somehow figuring out a way to acquire 2 first-round picks. You trade the number 3, and maybe you can still get a top 10 and a late 1st-round pick. And then maybe you won't be able to get Marvin Harrison Jr., but you could draft a guy like Malik Neighbors, a guy like Rome Odunze, or one of the 8 or 9 tackles that is expected to go in the 1st round. Or maybe you can get J.J. McCarthy with one of those later picks, if you like him a little bit better than you do Drake May, and then you have another pick in the 1st round to draft maybe Odunze, maybe Neighbors, maybe one of the other wide receivers, and then you still have the 34th overall pick, which is essentially a late 1st round draft pick, and you got a lot to work with there. But the one plus about this Calvin Ridley situation is the Patriots still have a ton of cap space to spend. They can really throw the bag at guys like Tyron Smith at tackle, Jonah Williams. They filled the tight end position yesterday with the acquisition of Austin Hooper, but that wasn't too expensive. And they can actually really spend a lot of money on defense, or maybe make one of these blockbuster trades for one of these high-end wide receivers that they can then sign to a long-term extension. There's a lot of options here, and look, it's tough seeing the Patriots miss out on Ridley, but for $23 million a year, probably would have been a little bit more expensive than that, because Ridley would want to offset what he would get in Massachusetts relative to Tennessee. So he would probably want $25 million from the Patriots, $26 million to make it work. And there's no way the Patriots would spend that much on a guy who is really not one of the premier wide receivers in the NFL. And I'm glad they didn't pull the trigger there. I'm glad they didn't feel pressured. Yeah, we're going to hear the criticism. We're going to hear the Michael Felgers of the world saying the Patriots are cheap. They haven't done anything. All they've done is bring people back. This is the kind of stuff Bill Belichick would do. I don't think so. I think Belichick would have let Bourne walk. I think he would have let Henry walk. He may have even let Michael Onwenu walk, although I think they did get a very, very team-friendly deal for Onwenu. But would they have convinced Josh Uche to come back for a year for cheap, who really wanted to play under Gerard Mayo? Probably not. So, look, I think Elliott Wolf has done a good job so far in free agency. I love the Austin Hooper acquisition to pair with Hunter Henry. The guy can block. He can run downfield, runs clean routes, does everything you could ask a tight end to do, and he's not going to be asked to do all that much because Hunter Henry's going to be in front of him. They really upgraded there. So, look, the receiving core needs work. The offensive line still needs work, but they got some cash to spend. Not going to get a lot at receiver this year in free agency, but there's still a lot of good tight ends or tackles out there that they can go after. And we'll see what happens at the quarterback position, which they will presumably be addressing in the draft in addition to Jacoby Brissett. So Patriots also made a couple of moves, signing defensive lineman Armon Watts to a 1-year, $3 million year. This really just kind of adds depth to the defensive line, kind of a rotational guy, 27 years old, entered the league in 2019 as a 6th-round pick out of Arkansas. Appeared in 40 games for the Minnesota Vikings in 3 seasons. Was eventually released because the team was making roster cutdowns. Went to the Chicago Bears, signed a 1-year deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers after. In total, he's played a combined 73 regular season and playoff games and has 141 tackles and 8.5 sacks in that time. Large human being, 6'5", 307 pounds, and he's going to help make up for the departure of Lawrence Guy, who is no longer going to be there. Again, rotational, not something that is going to move the needle by any means, but he does add some depth to that defense. And this defense is looking pretty good. I'm not a big fan of the loss of Mac Wilson, but they added the Taki fella, and pretty much everybody else is coming back. So they were already an elite defense. I'm expecting them to stay that way, considering Gerard Mayo is there, considering DeMarcus Covington is now the DC, and he played a heavy role last season with that defense. So this was a pretty decent move, but again, nothing that's going to move the needle. Something I'm a little bit more excited about, though, the Patriots have signed Anthony Jennings to a new 3-year deal with a base salary of $12 million. Anthony Jennings has been an edge linebacker, really came into stride this past season, and this edge group is basically intact, right? I mean, they have Matthew Judon, they have Jennings, they have Josh Uche. All these guys are coming back. They're not going to skip a beat there. Very good with the run defense, also plays a little bit of special teams, and it's an incentive-laden deal. So the base is $12 million, but he can make as much as $24 million over that 3-year period. So has a strong incentive to continue to improve, which I would expect Anthony Jennings will. And then another move, which I just mentioned, Patriots yesterday evening signed Austin Hooper from the Las Vegas Raiders, formerly, but really did spend a bunch of time with the Cleveland Browns. So another guy that's worked with Alex Van Pelt before, spent 2 seasons in Cleveland, spent 3 seasons with the Falcons before that. 6'4", 254 pounds. And like I said, he can do a little bit of everything. He can catch, he can run. Not the fastest, but for a tight end, he does what you need. Most importantly, he can block. And he was known primarily as a receiving tight end while he was with the Cleveland Browns. But the Las Vegas Raiders, and I guess he did spend a year in Tennessee as well, but the Las Vegas Raiders really used him as a blocking tight end. And he really did help the run game. So he definitely improved in that area, can do whatever you ask of him. He's also a 2-time Pro Bowler, made it in 2018 and 2019 during his time with the Atlanta Falcons. 29 years old, great guy to pair with Hunter Henry. I think they upgraded there, considering Mike Gesicki was basically just a large wide receiver. Basically, he fills the role of Mike Gesicki as a receiver and Pharaoh Brown as a blocker, who the Patriots both lost out on. But if you can do that with Hunter Henry and you can do that with Hooper, and you don't have to play a third tight end, you're in a good situation as long as both of those guys stay healthy. But again, you got to boost the receiving core, whether it's via trade, through the draft. And if they don't get Marvin Harrison Jr., or even if they do, I hope they also consider a guy like Xavier Legette out of South Carolina. I think he's the most underrated receiver in this draft. Has a lot of size, almost freezes in the air when he goes up to catch the ball. I think he's a guy who could be your number one in week 1. Maybe you get both. I don't know. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Are you sad to see the Patriots lose out on Calvin Ridley, or do you look at the money figure and go, $23 million a year, we probably would have had to pay 25, 26 to get him? I'm happy not spending that amount on the 30th best receiver in the league. Or maybe you just say, hey, this receiving core is so bad, we should have overpaid, even though the Titans clearly did overpay, but the Patriots should have as well. Maybe that's your opinion, but let me know in the comments below and what they should do in the draft. If you agree with me, chase after Marvin Harrison Jr. so you can stop worrying about this number 1 wide receiver slot and figure out the quarterback spot later. Do you want Drake May? Do you want J.J. McCarthy? You're happy with one of the second-tier guys? Let me know, and we'll be back with more Pats Cast coverage as more breaking news rolls in.